Happy hikers. We are so excited to have the Mojave Desert Land Trust joining us on this interview today. The Mojave Desert Land Trust, MDLT for short, takes on the greatest challenges facing the California desert, permanently protecting land, restoring habitat, preserving native seeds, and so much more. They defend the night skies, water, and critical species that make up a thriving desert ecosystem in the California and Mojave deserts. Join us on the inside for our interview with staff member, volunteer coordinator, Mackenzie. Welcome back, happy hikers, to another installation of our YouTube series where we are interviewing, talking to, conversing with other outdoor organizations, primarily in the nonprofit sector, that we look up to, we are inspired by. In this case, one that I actually volunteer with and adore myself. And that today is the Mojave Desert Land Trust, MDLT for short. And I'm honored to have my volunteer coordinator from there, Mackenzie, on. Mackenzie, welcome to the show.
And thanks so much for your support, and we're always happy to have you volunteer with us. You're like a star volunteer, especially in our education program. So yeah, thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It's a great organization to be a part of, and while I'm still in the desert, I'm in a different desert, and I'm yearning to get back to your desert as soon as possible to continue doing stuff with all of you. Why don't you maybe tell everybody a little bit about the mission, the vision of MDLT, and maybe your role a little bit, because I think you have a unique story within the organization as well.
Yeah, for sure. So the Mojave Desert Land Trust, even though the Mojave is in our name, the mission of the organization is to protect both the Colorado and Mojave desert ecosystems and their natural, scenic, and cultural resource values. So we often shorten that mission to just saying like the California desert. So that's something that we often say. And so part of protecting these natural, scenic, and cultural resource values, we're also looking to protect like dark night skies, clean air and water, broad views and vistas, and then also working hard to protect the plants and animals that call these deserts home. So I am the outreach and volunteer coordinator at this organization. I've been here for close to 2.5 years now, and I come from a background of working in outdoor and environmental education, and it's just been such a great time working here. I've learned so much, and I get to connect with really cool people such as you, Mike, who also like share this mission and vision with us and are eager to get their hands dirty, get the work done, and help us protect the desert. Our big campaign this year has been "The Desert is Not a Wasteland," and we're working hard to kind of change this perception of the desert as a place where people just go dump trash, or maybe people aren't seeing the opportunities for conservation or the biodiversity that already is here and what needs protecting. So yeah, that's just a little bit of what we do. Usually I have a whole hour-long presentation to go in each department of the organization. What we do is so big and broad, and it's just such a great team to be working with, both staff and volunteers.
Well, and it is, and since I do have some firsthand knowledge, I love the variety of ways you can get involved. I love the bumper sticker that y'all have, the Desert Defender, along with the Desert is Not a Wasteland, because I think there is a bit of a misperception or just a lack of knowledge, knowing like what is capable and what the desert is doing for the surrounding populations and the ecosystems, and why it's so important to protect. But I mean, I got to do everything from picking up trash to taking kids around to learn about the seeds that are being grown, to working on a mountain preserve and watering plants that were under your supervision, just a really neat variety of ways to get involved. Of course, you can donate both land and or monetarily. So I think it's a really cool organization in that there's not just one way you need to work with MDLT.
Yeah, and there's also so much overlap in our different volunteer teams. So of course we have like our dedicated core of volunteers that kind of stick with one kind of general like volunteer task or activity, but there's so many opportunities to like, yeah, like what you were saying, like get involved in so many different aspects of the organization. And we also have a lot of volunteers actually help us with like admin work as well. And that is like a huge help to our organization, even though it's not, maybe as flashy as, maybe our other projects. And any project our volunteers help with, we greatly appreciate. And it is such a big help to us.
You're right, though. There's a lot of that work. There's also the seed cleaning, which, I love the asterisk by it's like, just be forewarned that this is a sedentary activity. But for some people, that is exactly what they're looking for. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Happy People Hike as people interested in hiking. Some of the volunteer activities you actually have, you just were telling me before we started recording on how you went on a hike to Big Morongo Canyon Preserve with some of the local schools. So there's also even volunteer hiking opportunities as well.
Yeah, even for those who are looking for what I call like a high adventure volunteer team, we also have volunteers help us with land monitoring. And so a lot of this is, hiking cross country, like maybe we don't have trails on that preserve yet. And this really helps our organization because we are accredited through the Land Trust Alliance. And so we have to cross our T's and dot our I's and make sure as a land trust we're taking care of the lands. And, we have a presence on these lands that we're acquiring and managing. And so we have a dedicated volunteer team that really helps us hike across this difficult desert terrain and take geo-referenced photo points for us. And then we incorporate those photos and any other notes they may collect into our reporting. And then also if we find any stewardship issues, such as like if there's an illegal dump or maybe some unauthorized off-highway vehicle recreation happening on these lands, we have the information to then collect some other volunteers, maybe the same kind of pool of volunteers, to help us correct these stewardship issues and help restore the habitat again. So it's a really great volunteer team. It does require a little bit extra training, and I've been fortunate enough to help provide free first aid and CPR training through another local nonprofit called the High Desert Emergency Action Alliance. So we partner with them, and they help us put on those trainings. So yeah, that's another great team. That sounds like for your crowd at Happy People Hike.
Yes, exactly. And so let's talk, before we go into a couple examples, as somebody, you and I have lived in these, if you will, quote, California deserts, end quote. For those that aren't, though, I think Happy People Hike, for instance, was founded in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where there's a lot of people don't realize the importance needed in the preservation, conservation, and continued monitoring of the Great Lakes. And I think the Great Lakes is a good example. If you aren't from a Great Lakes area, just like here, if you're not from these California deserts, why is protecting, and what the MDLT mission is, why are the California deserts so important?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So the first thing I think of is I'm looking at our logo here, and it has the iconic Joshua tree, or Yucca brevifolia, on it. And this is now a species that's protected under the state of California. It's a state threatened species. And, with our climate crisis, which is a global problem, it's also having local effects. And so the range of the Joshua tree is decreasing. And there's not a lot of repopulation happening from the plant. And it's an iconic species of the desert, and it also serves a lot of ecological purposes. It provides shelter, and it has a co-evolutionary relationship with the yucca moth, which has its whole life cycle in and around the Joshua tree. So that's just one of the many species. The other one is the Mojave Desert tortoise, which is now an endangered species under the state of California. It moved recently from threatened to endangered, which is a sort of double-edged sword because we don't want to see it on the endangered species list, but that means it might help it get a little bit more protection. And the desert tortoise is what we call an ecological engineer. And so they build these giant burrows. I mean, the burrows on the surface are pretty, they're not much to boast about. It looks like if a tortoise walks into, a hole, that's what you would picture the burrow to look like. But they go so deep under the ground where they brumate over the winter. And with that, they bring seeds with them into these holes, and they're helping replenish the seed bank that happens naturally in the soil. And so then they're helping kind of propagate these desert plants. And so, yeah, that's just, some of our most iconic biodiversity that I think of. But the desert as land itself also serves purpose. It helps with carbon sequestration. I believe, I wouldn't quote me on this, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think about the California deserts account for about 18% of the state's carbon sequestration potential.
Yes.
So when we're thinking about climate change, the desert does play a really big role in helping us reverse these effects. And yeah,
I think
that's just some of it. I can keep going.
Yeah, no, I mean that one I remember that one, the 18% number of the whole state. And I think that's where I kind of draw back to is like we need the deserts, we need the forests, we need the Great Lakes, we need the animals and the diversity, we need to protect the native lands. It's all intertwined.
Yeah, and that's why I think our campaign, The Desert is Not a Wasteland, is so significant to me because, I was born in Arizona, and I grew up a little bit in Hawaii, and I moved to Southern California to do college, and I ended up moving out here. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, I'm never going to live in the desert again. It's so brown and boring and blah. And then it's actually when I moved to Southern California and I visited, Joshua Tree National Park and Death Valley, I was like, oh my gosh, like this place is incredible. And it was like my own, sort of refuge from, these more city areas that I was living in at the time. And so I love talking about the desert and how important it is, and it is all interconnected, like what you were saying. With we need the forests, and we also need everyone and all these different organizations to be involved in protecting the desert as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we're just going on the wasteland theory, it's like, I've been here in Tucson and Saguaro National Park and some of the other nature preserves and state parks around Tucson in a different desert. And the spring bloom here has been absolutely wild. And if you don't think there's spring bloom in the desert, you've never seen a cacti open up in the way in which it does in these months. And it is really quite stunning. I think, if anything, it's the exact opposite. I was almost having a little bit of a sensation overload of flowers when I was hiking on these trails a couple weeks ago. It was kind of, the pollination that was going on last Friday when I was hiking is just out of this world. So it is hardly a wasteland.
Yeah, I definitely... I was driving on the 247, a lot this past month in April, and the desert dandelion sometimes is so neon it's like I'm just drawing highlighter like all over my car windows. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so bright and it's incredible, and it's also was like right next to that purple sand verbena, and it's just
Oh yeah.
like gorgeous little artist palette happening.
That's great. So I guess we've kind of talked about a few different stories, but if you want to share maybe one more a short story that encapsulates a bit of the impact you can have as MDLT, or maybe like why you do what you do and enjoy doing it there. Something that can really like ground into somebody who's a little bit unfamiliar with the organization or the California deserts in general.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when I think about impact, I've been thinking about, how much the volunteer program has grown since I've, been able to come into this position. And in 2023, we had 145 volunteers, help us with all kinds of different projects. And they donated altogether over 4,600 volunteer hours. And I was doing some math on that, and I was like, that seems like such a crazy high ratio. And I think that means that like each volunteer on average donated maybe 30 hours.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm like, that is, because I'm like stuttering because I'm just like, I can't even like put it into words like how awesome our volunteer community is. And it's hard to think of just one project. We've done so many. But I think like when I think about impact, it goes beyond like those numbers and, checking off some reporting boxes or, other deliverables that our volunteers help us, hit. But it's also about like seeing these connections that are made to the volunteer community. And I think especially like a world that's coming, back a little bit more from like the COVID pandemic, and we learned about how much, connection means to us on like a person-to-person basis. And I went through Zoom school, and I started this job like pretty hybrid as well. And so just kind of seeing that grow and form in our own community here, like I've come across some people where I assumed that they've been lifelong friends, and I was like, oh yeah, like where'd you guys meet? Like you guys like hang out all the time. I hear like you guys get dinner. And they're like, we met here, and they're like, now we're the best of friends, and we hang out like every week.
That's
like,
great.
So awesome that people just have these genuine like connections over a shared love and a shared cause. And so yeah, it's really cool to pick up all that trash and pick up the mattresses and dumped appliances, and maybe we're hiking over giant mountains. But I think ultimately, like, I think about our volunteer community between like staff and volunteers as well. And that's what really warms my heart.
No, it's great. And I felt very welcomed there. Like I said earlier, I can't wait to come back. And I still feel involved, even just being a few hours away right now. It is really neat. And, going back to your 30 hours, I was just reading a book on how if you volunteer basically 1 hour a week, doesn't have to be, doing some type of like service work, you are going to be setting yourself up. You are going to be 2 times as inherently happy as the average individual if you can do that 1 hour a week. So 52 weeks a year. So maybe even encourage some of those volunteers of the team. Maybe they even up at 22 hours next year for you, just to get to those happiness levels for them.
Can you send me that book? That
really I will. Yeah, I will.
Yeah.
Tell me, we already talked about one earlier with the group that helps support your CPR, first aid, wilderness first aid certifications. It doesn't have to be in the high desert of California, but tell us another outdoor-based group, nonprofit that you maybe feel a little inspo from, maybe draw some ideas from, just are happy that they're out there also doing their thing like you are.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so again, like shout out to High Desert Emergency Action Alliance. They do a lot of great work out here in the area. And another organization that I've been following, just mostly on social media, is the United States Adaptive Recreation Center. I have one of my great friends, she volunteers there, and she has just been beaming about her volunteer experience there. And so what this organization does is they help people with, physical disabilities get outside. And I'm more familiar with their program at the Big Bear ski resorts. So they help people do adaptive skiing. But I was just looking at their website recently, and they do like summer programming in Big Bear on the lakes, getting people out in the water, and then also they've done some events in like Johnson Valley, I believe, too. So they're kind of, in the desert region north of Bear Mountain. So, yeah, I think it's an incredible organization. I would love to get involved with them if I had the time. But yeah, I just want to shout them out. And also, I also want to give a shout out to Core That. They're a nonprofit, I believe, based in the East Coast. But they are a conservation corps, and for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. And so I've had the opportunity to take a ASL class through their organization, just kind of like a expedited ASL class for professionals working in outdoor areas. And so that was just such a great class, and I love following their blogs and reading about what their conservation corps are doing on the East Coast. So yeah, those are definitely, I know you said one, but I wanted to highlight those three.
You can, I love more, and I can put more than one in the show notes. So that's quite okay. And actually that might be my favorite question now on when I do these interviews. Brittany, who I had on the last one, she talked about unlikely hikers. And then I started digging into them, and now I'm going to probably this afternoon look on the groups, because I was not familiar with some of these groups that you just mentioned. So I
love unlikely hikers as well. I look to them, and I read all their blogs and guidance, and yeah, they definitely inform me and how I approach our volunteer program as well.
That's great. So little bit from your end, why do you like to be in nature, in the desert? What is maybe a favorite experience of yours, and that, or one that you hope you can experience at some point in time in the high desert or anywhere else in the world, I guess?
Yeah, I think I've always just kind of had the nature bug. I had the opportunity to kind of grow up camping and fishing with my parents. But I've been thinking about just kind of like these small nature moments, like even in my backyard in Arizona with my sister. And growing up, like we would, go and watch the caterpillars and ladybugs and try and catch them and observe them in like little containers and then let them go. I also had a little obsession with earwigs for a little bit. So
nice.
I was always definitely interested in like observing nature. And I think now that I, work, a job where I'm kind of bound to a desk a little bit more, when I do get the opportunity to go out by myself, I think back to that kind of childhood wonder and the opportunity to slow down and just watch all these small lives happening all around me all at once. And yeah, I don't know, it's just a great experience and practice in, bringing back that wonder and awe that I felt, as a child. And so it's just like kind of some, small but big nature experiences that I think really shapes how I approach my experience with nature today. And I also reflect upon, in college, I started going to, I went to the University of Redlands outdoor programs, and it's a kind of like an extracurricular thing. And so you can sign up for trips that are led by student leaders. And so you can go backpacking and camping and kayaking. And then you can also, if you want to kind of take a step further, sign up as a trip leader. And so I started with this organization or this club. I started on my first backpacking trip in 2018, I believe. We went to Zion National Park, and I was totally brand new to all of this. Like I had, maybe like tent camps here or there. Like I liked doing some day hikes, but this was like the first big, like multi-day expedition I felt like I had been on. And I remember we were just starting to get on the trail. The sun was going down. We were going to hike maybe a mile or two before we set up our camp. And my water bladder exploded all over my pack and got my sleeping bag soaking wet. And it was Zion in February, so it was pretty cold and freezing temperatures at night. And so I remember the whole trip, I was pretty embarrassed that I had spilled my water in front of all these really cool backpacking people. But they really helped me like air out the sleeping bag any chance I had. They helped give me some extra layers to keep me warm, and it turned out to be just such a, life-changing trip for me. And I remember I was like, I've never felt so grateful for like the sun, because anytime the sun would come out, I would go stand in it or try and air out my gear. And it was just kind of that funny little mishap that I think really made it such a great trip. A little too fun.
Yep.
And I remember just like getting to this one lookout, and I think it was one of our last days in the backcountry, and I just started crying just because I've had such a great time with these people, and I felt so supported and capable that I was like, I can't believe I've been carrying basically like all my essentials on my back. And it's something that I never thought I could do, and that people told me I probably would never be able to do. And so that I think really shapes my experience in nature today as well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, because that leads into all the things that you can do in nature, getting involved. I have a great respect and love and admiration for MDLT and the Mojave Desert Land Trust and all the work that you're doing. You can volunteer, you can donate. There's plenty of ways to get involved. We're going to have all those in the show notes. And of course, if you just want to volunteer and you, for some reason, can't find the information on the website, just reach out to me and I'll get you in touch with Mackenzie.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's many ways to get involved, many ways to get a hold of me as well. So yeah, thanks so much, Mike.
So we're going to sign off right now, but thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to MDLT and Happy People Hike hanging out together.